Welcome back to the Morning Radio. I'm Michael.
I'm Eric.
And this is week 2 of our Fear episodes.
Yeah, week 2, but we haven't even left.
No, we haven't.
If
We
you haven't
recorded them.
noticed.
We recorded them back to back. We're wearing the same stuff.
Yeah.
It was just easier to do. We were having such a good conversation. Just film them back to back. So
And so I'd say happy birthday to you, or ask you how your birthday was, but you haven't celebrated it yet.
no, I haven't left the house or the church. So
No, so you're still here.
yeah.
Okay, no birthday for you yet.
But hey, so last week, just to kind of recap for those who didn't get to watch last week's episode, we talked through some top 10 lists, and we found out that there was a big change between 2016 and 2019 as far as the politicization of the top 10 fears of Americans. Chapman University gave us that info. But what was consistent?
Number one.
At the top of the list for 5 years running now.
5 years, number one. Over 77% consistent, actually. Of course, that's not true because 2016, they didn't give us the numbers. So
We don't know how
don't know how it was. But the corruption of government officials.
People do not trust the government.
Do you believe that?
Politicians.
Not at all.
Which, I would say that's a healthy fear to have.
Very healthy.
I think the founders of the United States of America shared that fear, hence why they founded our country the way they did.
And maybe this week we have somebody watching because they heard that some of the things got a little political twist on it from last week. So let me just say, just real clear, real up front, that if you're watching today and you're like going to be trying to be judgmental about two pastors that are trying to like talk political stuff, that is not this podcast. So you might want to go somewhere else. But
we are not political dudes, and we certainly, I think I speak for both of us when I say our intention is never to divide the church. Our intention is to unite people and to forget the political divides between us, because ultimately they don't really matter in the long run.
So anyway, just saying that this is not maybe what you're looking for, other than today we are talking pretty specific about the fears of the church, because that's what we talked about, fear coming from lies, and we talked about the father of lies being the enemy, and that strikes up fear and doom and gloom. So
are you trying to tell them that we're not a clickbait show? That we're not just trying to get them to click on us just because we're controversial?
We should try that sometime.
Well, we did.
We did.
Not intentionally, but like our alien episode, our
true,
ghosts episode. I mean, if you're interested in some random topics, this is the place for you. This is because we go from ghosts to aliens to sports to fear. I mean, we cross all kinds of different boundaries with our show.
And our whole idea is to have the morning burrito, have you get something to eat, grab a cup of coffee, and we want to just talk to you as pastors. In a church, maybe you're in a church, maybe you're not. We want to encourage you to get into a church. Doesn't need to be our church, but there is life that is fun to talk about.
Yeah.
But there's also heavy topics like this.
Yeah.
Relevant topic of fear, because
Yeah.
there's so much fear right now that divides us as a country, but also creeps into the church, which means if it's in the church, it's in our personal lives.
Right.
Well, I should say it the other way around. If it's in our personal lives, it's in the church. Either way, it's there. So we want to talk about that a little bit. So
I'll start where I started last week. I told you we would get back to this, but for me, my greatest fear that I've always had, the one that I've always struggled with, is this idea.
Oh, I know.
What is it?
Spiders.
Well, yes, but no.
Clowns?
No.
I'm lost. Go ahead.
Rattlesnakes.
Oh, I forgot that.
I hate rattlesnakes.
All right.
No, I've always been afraid of not living up to my own expectations. And I think, if you're watching this today, you may live there. You may live in that space where you feel like there's a certain benchmark you're supposed to hit in your job or with your family, being a husband or a wife, spouse, whatever. There's always these like internal benchmarks that you think you're supposed to hit. There are things you're supposed to do. And then when you don't meet those benchmarks that you have for yourself, you beat yourself up about it. And I definitely have a hard time. I am afraid of not living up to the standard that I think I'm supposed to.
Yep, I can relate to that big time. But you know where my mind went during when you were saying that?
No.
You're saying for your husband or your wife or your spouse. That just struck me as funny because either you're a husband or a wife.
Well, I know, but I like.
Okay.
I was trying to encapsulate.
That's a different podcast.
I came back and was trying to encapsulate both of them. I should have said spouse from the very beginning because it would just made it easier. I wouldn't have had to say husband or wife. I could have just said spouse from the beginning and it would have made it easier. But
need my other coffee.
Well, I don't drink coffee. That's the problem, according to you.
Yeah.
No. So what's your biggest fear? What have you struggled
So
with?
I didn't really get into it last week. What maybe what some of my biggest fears are, but probably my biggest fear is letting my family down. Just as a man, as a dad. But that's probably it. And I mean letting them down, like misleading them or not teaching them good enough in how they should live life. But just letting them down and just every day spending time with them, showing interest in their hobbies, and letting them down by not correcting the wrongs, or the wrong thinkings. Just kind of I want to be their friend. So I don't want to let them down in that, but I also want to let them down in just my, I guess, identity as a Christian dad or a Christian husband, not letting them down that way. So
do you think that we as pastors have a fear, or maybe not you and I, maybe, I don't know, have a fear of being honest and vulnerable with our people, letting our people in?
Well, that's loaded.
I know.
So yeah, I think we do have a fear of that.
Again, not saying that you and I struggle with this, but I know pastor friends who have struggled with it. Do you think that's a more common thing?
Oh, it's very common. Pastoring is very lonely. It's hard to have best friends because you have to be their pastor before their friend, and you can't get to be a best friend until you've been a friend. And you can't do that if sometimes you have to make the hard call as a pastor because people don't let you do that.
Do you think the reverse is true, that people have a hard time being, they're afraid of being themselves with pastors in our churches?
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the judgment, I feel like hell's going to break loose in their life because pastor knows the deep, dark secrets of what's going on behind closed doors, or what's in the refrigerator, or that little four-letter word that I always end up saying, or that I slept with my, coworker. Conversations change, folks, when people realize you're a pastor. Or if pastors come into the house for dinner, hey, let's make sure the booze is put away.
Or the videos.
Or the videos.
I've had literally. Okay, so I've gone to a house for dinner one time, and I hadn't been to the house before, but I was looking. I don't even think this family knows that I noticed this, but I did. It's not here, but looked at their, bookshelf where they had videos and stuff, and I kind of knew the family well enough to know who they were. And I looked at the shelf and I'm like, there's only Disney movies up here. There's no way they only have Disney movies. Because they knew references to movies, and none of those movies were up on the shelf. And so I'm thinking, I wonder if they took, because there was a big empty space. One of the shelves was almost completely empty. And I'm like, I bet you they took all their movies and hid them from me.
We are smart people. We catch on to things.
I couldn't believe it. I was like,
we catch on to it.
If you come to my house has DVDs floor to ceiling. We love movies.
That's funny.
It was just an interesting. So last week we talked a lot about different irrational fears that we have, in that one of those top 10 lists, it was pollution of drinking water, which for Americans, I don't even know how that could possibly be even a real fear.
64.6% of Americans fear the pollution of their drinking water,
which is completely irrational when we have the cleanest drinking water of any country in the world. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about specifically the church, what are some examples of some irrational fears that the church or Christians have? From your angle as a lead pastor, a pastor who's served for how many years now have you been pastoring?
Yeah, 30 million.
30 million.
30.
You look really good.
30, I think. I mean,
you look good for your age, man.
Yeah.
Way to go.
Yeah, thanks.
Well done.
So
aging with grace.
Lots of grace, let me tell you. So what was the question?
So what are some, from your perspective as a guy who's been in ministry for 30 plus years now, what are some irrational fears that Christians have that, it's things that would be more central to the church, Christians, they may not necessarily apply to those outside of the church.
Relating like now in this day that we live, or
just across your ministry time?
Because I think they're different.
So give some old examples
So-
and then some more recent ones.
So I think an old example would be drinking and smoking. Would be really fears, like you can't bring somebody who drinks and smokes into the church.
Well, now you're hitting close to home with the old Nazarene crowd.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the only crowd I know, 'cause that's where I was born and raised. So
going to the movie theater.
we couldn't swim together because somebody's going to get pregnant those days, or you can't go to the movie theater because somebody's going to lose articles of clothing for somehow. I'm not sure.
No dancing.
No dancing because
And no going with girls
whatever.
that do.
That's right. But I really think some of the fears of the old were fears of evangelistic fears of our lost friends. Which that's not really a fear today. We don't really talk about pray for the unsaved. We need to pray for salvation. We challenge it as pastors, but I don't really hear our people talk that. So that's not really a fear, I don't think, anymore, for whatever reason.
Unfortunately.
Right. Hell was a fear, I think, back in the day. I remember growing up. I'm not sure hell is really a fearful thing anymore.
And it's funny you bring that up because my experience has been, just to give an example, one of the towns that I would frequent when I grew up in Chicago, the suburbs of Chicago, a town called Naperville. And every Friday night and Saturday night, I think too, there was this group of pastors, and I don't know what denomination they hailed from. They may have been non-denominational for all I know. But these two guys, every weekend, were down in the corner. And this is one of those places where it's a really neat little downtown area. It's got a lot of bars and a Barnes & Noble that's right on the corner that's 2 stories. You can go and read books and drink coffee and do all those things.
Spend the whole day.
Oh, yeah. But at night, these guys would be standing on the corner, handing out tracts and screaming hellfire and brimstone, telling people that they're going to go to hell and this, that, and the other. And you can tell that what you just said is true by the reactions of the people.
Mm-hmm.
They would get those tracts, and this is, 15, 20 years ago now. They'd get those tracts, and they'd just throw them on the ground or throw them in a garbage can if they were respectful. And they didn't even think twice about a fear of hell. Mm-hmm. But the just as an aside, the reverse of that is the more unfortunate part, is that those people who received those tracts from those guys, most of them will never ever listen to a reasonable believer try and share the realities of heaven and hell with them, because those two guys ruined it.
Yeah, maybe so.
Because there's going to be a fear that all Christians are like those two bozos.
Right.
So
yeah, no, I've heard that argument too. So I think that's just some. I think there was a fear, even probably 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, that if I make my kids go to church, I'm going to lose them to the church.
Oh, yeah. As a youth pastor, you hear that all the time.
You do. I'm not sure but was that a fear of today still? I don't know if it really is.
I actually think it's more of a fear today.
More of a fear?
Yeah, I mean, being in student ministry these last 10 years, we've had families in our ministry that they have one kid that'll come, but the other one is not really interested in it. And my mom and dad have both told me, like, we're not going to force him or her to go, because if we do, they'll never want to return to the church. I'm like, yeah, but if you don't sow the seed now, then you may lose them anyway. So I'm not saying you have to take them kicking and screaming, but like my parents, that was a requirement to live in their house, is that we went to church. Like,
I was made to go kicking and screaming.
We had no choice. And I guess for me, it was never an issue because I wanted to be at church, but I'm not like everybody else, I suppose.
You're special. So some of the fears though, like today, these lists that we read, the list, kind of is one side or the other, maybe. There might be some personal things in these lists that we read from the university, but what's not in the list, this is where I think fear is maybe changed a little bit. But the rapture used to be a thing of fear. I still think it is.
That's because they're not coming out with Left Behind movies anymore.
Right. That's probably true. But where's there's a real fear of our religious freedoms,
There's definitely fear there in the church
being taken from us, but it doesn't make any secular list. So I think I have a list that maybe is in my head on what are the fears of the church or the fears of the Christian. I think the fears of the Christians are my loved ones aren't going to make it to heaven. I think that's a real fear. My loved ones don't have an opportunity to get to the church because churches are closing. And my loved ones won't ever get into the kingdom of heaven because of all of the right or left people's point of views and social platforms and critical theorist ways of views and false teaching that's out there. I think those are very real fears. So how do you combat all those? Well, we're not going to do that on this podcast. But
we couldn't even if we wanted to.
Couldn't even begin to dream about that. But I think those are real fears. I think another fear is communism. 30 years ago, that wasn't a fear. Growing up, I wasn't afraid of that.
Well, so I think that's more of an age thing. So our younger folks, we saw statistics that the fear of communism or socialism, as it was broken out in this survey, was very age specific, right? 17 to 29, I think, was the first bracket of age that they studied. And that first bracket, like when it came to socialism, communism, there was zero fear. But the ones who were in their 50s and up, there was a significant fear of socialism and communism. And part of that's because the younger generation hasn't lived through true socialism or communism. They didn't live through the Cold War. They didn't live through the much of the Castro, thing down in Cuba and whatnot. So, there's a lot of not understanding history. Again, that's not a political statement. That's just a statement of fact that people don't understand. And so the age difference is clear. But I think in the church, when it comes to socialism, or communism, for instance, I think there's a lot of misinformation about Jesus. We talked about this. We did a thing about who Jesus is, a podcast. Jesus, newsflash, was not a communist, nor was he a socialist, nor was he a Republican, nor was he a liberal. Jesus was Jesus.
Right.
He was not a political figure in the way that we think of political figures in America. He would not have been on either side of the aisle. I just need that to be clear. That is not who Jesus was. Jesus was a subversive character. He was not an outright political figure, and he didn't want to be. And so when we play the enemy, going back to where we were last week and where we're at again today, the enemy uses that kind of fear to divide people in the church that are conservative and people in the church that are more on the liberal side.
Right. So
it's ridiculous.
So keeping on that, civil unrest is a real fear. For whatever, probably more, for some than others, but in the church, in the Christian life, and I can't figure out why the civil unrest is a big fear factor, other than we like our stuff, we like our health, we like our physical security, we like our emotional security, we like our financial security. And when there's civil unrest, that just takes it all up and throws it in the air. Of course, we're going to feel uncomfortable with it. But when does uncomfort turn into fear?
So are you saying fear of like a riot happening in your town? Are you talking and looting? Or are you talking about a fear that something is going to cause civil unrest?
No, the civil unrest that's already happening.
Oh,
something
okay.
that's already been birthed, whether it's, local rioting in the street or, across the nation.
I think obviously that's going to be much more localized depending on where you live. People who live in Portland might have much more concern about that, or Seattle, for instance, than out here in Eastern Oregon, just because we don't see that nearly as much out here.
But from somebody who likes to travel a lot, there is that fear of traveling. I was like, well, man, do we go there?
Right. Well, right.
We go there.
But see, I think it's more of we're trying to push this more towards church and, the fears of church people. I think what is fearful, and again, this is a founded fear. This is something that people should be at least aware of.
Cautious of.
There is a division within our country that is unlike any other division we've ever seen. And I mean, frankly, in my ministry career, now granted, it's not super long. It's only about a third of yours, but I've not seen the division in the church from a political standpoint where people are outwardly one side or the other. Take your pick of an issue. They're on one side or the other. I mean, it doesn't have to even be what we would call a political issue. People are just run to their polls and immediately polarize each other. And that's because of fear. We have a fear. Here's a big fear in the church: fear of being wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or the fear of offending.
Or being offended.
Mm-hmm.
I just won't talk to people because I don't want them to offend me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or we get into this. I mean, let's just bring it into COVID era. Okay, fear in the church. When we look at this list, we have a fear of finances in the church. What is the church doing? How are we going to survive? When in reality, the church should be thriving better now than we ever have financially, because if you're really believing and worshiping the Lord with your first fruits, the way Scripture says, all of these stimulus packages, right? All these checks and relief, that we've gotten from the government. I mean, that's extra tithe money, but are we considering those as first fruits? I don't think we are. I think we're considering those of, hey, it's free gift, it's a free money, and really, I mean, it still belongs to the Lord. It's still part of your income, So I mean, there should be that, right? And so I don't know. That wasn't a guilt trip on anybody, but just throwing it out there as, man, there's a fear of our finance. We hang on to every penny we can get. There's people that haven't spent a dime of any relief that they've gotten from the government.
I'm not one of them.
You're not one of them, no. Because the fear of, either it's a real thank you very much, or it's like, we're going to need that. We're going to hang on to it.
Which both are really not good attitudes.
They're not, but they're not really all bad either. If in there. But the other thing is,
I did get to pay off some bills, so that was good.
There you go. You get out of debt there a little bit. But this polarization between church people when it comes to the simple thing of a mask.
Yeah.
We talked mask a little bit last week. Here's the question that comes up in my world right now. The question is mask or no mask?
It's both of our worlds. This is
yeah.
Every week now.
Because, so I'm just going to take this and run with it, okay?
Uh-oh.
Because there's those that have been vaccinated, and you have faith in the vaccine, that's why you got it. Right?
Sure.
And then there's those that are not going to be vaccinated, and yet we still all have to wear a mask. And there's a division there, because federal government, CDC, says you don't have to wear the mask, but yet it's strongly recommended. Right? But culture locally says you've got to wear the mask pretty much everywhere you go. So
not everywhere.
Well, mostly. So you've got this, this polarization that's happening, this division, this faction that's being created because, hey, I got the vaccine, so I don't have to do this. And, well, you know what? We're not going to get the vaccine, so we're going to wear a mask. And then it's like, well, I get offended because, you're not wearing a mask. And, well, I'm offended because you are wearing a mask and making me wear a mask. And then, where does that go in the church? So my question has been lately to people in our church is where do we go with this? Because no matter what side you're on, mask or not, do they help? Don't they help? That's not even what this is about. This is about judgmental.
Right.
And this is about your opinion that really doesn't matter.
And that's where it really comes down to. It is, again, there's a fear, an irrational fear of, so for instance, we've seen video after video after video of 2-year-olds and their families being kicked off of airplanes because a 2-year-old wasn't wearing their mask, or 3-year-old or whatever, right? It's an irrational fear. It's an irrational fear to be worried about a little baby not wearing their mask and infecting an entire airplane. Number one, because no airplanes have ever been infected. There's not been any major outbreaks on any airlines. Okay. When we come to the church, though, from the one side, if you do not wear a mask, the immediate judgment is that you don't care about people.
Right.
And if you're wearing your mask and you're fully vaccinated, the other side will look at you like, well, you're irrational and scared and afraid and this, that, and the other. While at that time, most of the people that I've talked to that are on that side, they'll just say something to the effect of, well, I care about people and it doesn't bother me to wear a mask, so I'm just going to wear it until we don't have to anymore. But here's the thing. If we allow that to divide us, stupid masks, if this is what divides the church, how far have we fallen as a church, as a people, that we're going to allow some masks to divide us even further? I mean, we already have political divide.
And some will say that it goes to our rights, right? They're
Sure.
taking our rights away. But that's part of the fear. That's part of the fear. I think that's really one of those things that impact the church right now, is that fear of my rights are being taken away, my rights are being infringed on, my right of going and feeling safe and warm and fuzzy and cuddly and stuff is not really happening. I feel, our church, any church, almost has this, we're respected, you're disrespected. We have this lack of feeling respect toward one another. And it all comes down not really even to the government anymore. It's, when are we going to take a stand? And the fear, I think, in the church is we need to take a stand, but nobody knows what the stand is.
Right.
We need to take a stand against government. That's like not a fear. That is something that needs to happen. But the fear is what hill do we take the stand against the government on?
Mm-hmm.
Masks are not the place where this pastor is going to jump on the fear bandwagon and go, yeah, we're going to die on this hill. So I'll just speak for our own leadership team in churches. That's not the hill we're going to die on. I do believe there's going to be a time when the church cannot be so fearful to stand against government. But that time in my heart, when I pray about it, I feel nothing to stand against the government and things right now.
And that's not to say that we don't I think this gets back to not understanding the other side, not hearing, not listening.
Right. And there's people that are not going to listen to what I'm just trying to say here.
Right. But if you're on the side of wearing masks, you have to understand that the other side has a rational and reasoned reason why they don't want to wear a mask. Especially if you're talking to a fully vaccinated person. They sat there for a year and a half waiting, right? Mm-hmm. Or almost a year and a half, waiting for a vaccine so that they could then go back to normal. And if they choose not to, we have to understand human beings have agency. And so if they choose not to, don't judge them, just leave them, let them be. Okay. Right. And if you're on the other side of the deal, if people want to wear masks, don't look at them side-eyed or, cross-eyed. Just let them live their life. If they want to wear masks, that's their business. I mean,
So now we became political on the mask versus, vaccine.
But we haven't taken a side one way or the other.
Other than it's not the hill to die on.
Well, I mean, it's not a hill to die on. It's not worth.
But here's the fear, even as pastors, is if we're being told you have to take a side.
Sure.
You've got to make a stand.
Sure.
You've got to say something. And I want to come back and go, I'm not afraid of this. I'm not afraid of the stand. Yeah, sure. I did not say I'm not afraid of COVID. I mean, I'm not, but
we have a healthy fear, an understanding,
a respectful fear, and understanding of it. But you have to understand that fear comes from the lie that comes from the enemy of lies, the father of lies, and it creates this fear that clouds your judgment and creates the anxiety and division amongst us as a church body. And I can't say enough about our church.
Sure.
Our church, through all of COVID, I mean, brother, we have flipped on a dime so many times this last year.
We talked about that today, last week in our staff meeting.
Yeah, we have changed so much. We have been so agile in how we've approached COVID. I couldn't be prouder
Yep.
than I am of our staff, of our board, our leadership teams, our re-engagement team, of our church body. It's been awesome. It's been a. I mean, I can't say it's been a fun journey, but it's been fun to watch the church maneuver itself in the time of crisis, and how we respond to crisis tells us how our heart is. And I want us to keep our hearts focused, just like Hebrews 12:2, talks about how Jesus says, hey, keep your eyes focused on me because I am the perfecter of your faith. I am the first, the last, I'm everything in between. We've got to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. And that's going to relieve a lot of the fear. Does it take care of the circumstance? Not at all. Are we still going to have a mask versus vaccine issue in the church? Yeah, we're going to have that.
Probably for the foreseeable future.
But, what we need to do is be ready for what's the next adventure. Somebody yesterday came up out of service, and I'm trying to remember what they said. They said something about, and if you're watching this, you can type it in there because I think you're one that maybe watches. Said that being surprised, something about how you're surprised, but you're not surprised because you're ready for it. I mean, you've anticipated it.
Yeah.
I don't know. They said it a cool way. I just bumbled all over that. But so type it in there. If you're watching, type that in there. Whatever you said there, surprised, not surprised because you handled it, kind of thing. But we need to be ready for more lockdowns. We need to be ready for the next, illness outbreaks if they happen. I mean, the way things go, things happen. Doesn't mean we're running in fear. It means we're running in front of it, and we're trying to, be proactive and ready so we can be smooth and not waste time in fear.
Right.
But spend our time shepherding, spend our time evangelizing, spend our time with helping with the fears and anxieties of life, not being lost in the fear. I think there's a big difference in that. Either you're lost in the fear or you're helping in the middle of fear. I don't think you can do both.
Well, and make sure you hear what we're saying too. When it comes to fear, and particularly because we've talked a lot about in the last 2 weeks, COVID-19, and our intention is not to tell you how you're supposed to believe about COVID-19. But I would say that no matter where you are at when it comes to masks, vaccines, whatever, make sure you're informed. Because part of the reason why we get afraid is that we don't understand things. And there is enough data out there to help you be knowledgeable about COVID-19. It is one thing, unlike some others, that we can actually have the information that we need to have a rational and reasonable understanding of this disease. And I would encourage you, make sure you're doing your research. Go to the CDC, go to the National Institute of Health and these other places that are doing the research. Johns Hopkins University is doing a lot. Stanford's doing a lot of research.
Well,
on
and the
COVID.
Anxiety of Depression Association of America is doing a lot.
It will help you to understand, and maybe you'll find, I really do kind of have an irrational fear of COVID-19. Or maybe you'll find I'm not taking this seriously enough, and that might help you. Be willing to change your mind, because you are not controlled by fear if you're willing to change your mind. If you're open-minded and you're listening and you're receiving information, it'll make you have a much easier time wherever you find yourself. And if you find yourself in a place, maybe you're one of our people, maybe you go to another church, but you've been kind of in lockdown for a long time. Maybe you're somebody who's fully vaccinated and you're still in lockdown. You need to consider, when is the time that it comes to an end? You need to consider those things, because you can't stay afraid forever. You just can't. You can't let it grip you forever.
So let's wrap this up.
Yep.
So here's some scripture for you. Psalm 34:4. I sought the Lord, and he answered me from all my fears. I love that verse, but there's some work there in that verse. If you want him to answer you and free you from your fears, you got to do something. Yep. You got to seek him. That's why David writes, he says, I sought the Lord. I did that. I chased Jesus. I sought the Lord. I chased after God. I did my part. I looked at him. I looked for him. I went on a hunting trip. I went hiking for him. And when I found him, he freed me from my fears. The second one is Matthew 6:34. You know this. It's don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough worries of its own. It's got enough issues, got enough problems. Focus on your day-to-day. And just know that God's bigger than anything that you're facing. And I know I use that phrase a lot, but I truly believe that. I truly believe that no matter how my fear looks in my life, God is bigger than my fear.
Yep.
And I know he's bigger than my fear because I know he is the author of peace. And he says, it's my peace that I leave with you. Don't be afraid. And I just love those. I love those passages. So spend some time reading in God's word. Start in the book of 1 John and just be reminded about your faith and how you got to your faith in Christ and what he did for you on the cross. Spend some time reading that and just basking in that, because what it does for me sometimes, I have to be reminded in my moments of fear and anxiety that Jesus did something for me because he's got a calling for my life, and the calling for my life isn't based in fear, but it's based on promise. And the promise is he'll never lead me where he can't take care of me. Mm-hmm. His will is never going to lead me where his grace cannot keep me.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
Well, you guys have a great week, and we will be back next Tuesday with another episode of our awesome show, because I think it's awesome. And
need to have a burrito, though.
Do we know what our topic for next week?
Surprise.
Okay,
who said
Gomer
that?
Pyle.
Yeah, there you go. You got it.
Little Andy Griffith for you today.
There you go.
All right, folks, you have a great week. We'll see you next week.